The first clue that someone had been stealing from my land was not buried in a bank vault or hidden in a lawyer's office. It was sitting on a kitchen table in a rental house that smelled like old coffee, rain-soaked work boots, and fear. Mason Reed pushed the wrinkled receipt toward me with 2 fingers, like the paper itself might burn him, and said, "I figured your uncle knew." Outside, the screen door slapped hard in the wind, once, twice, then settled into that rusty little rattle every old farmhouse seems to have. I looked down at the faded print across the top. Silver Ridge, HOA annual dues. Past due balance. Late assessment added. My name was not on it. My late Uncle Warren's name was not on it. But the address was one of ours, a small tenant house on the east side of Whitaker Farm, almost 2 miles from the nearest manicured lawn of Silver Ridge Estates. The amount due was $940. The date was 3 weeks before my uncle died, and the part that made the room go cold was not the money. It was the line under the balance that said, "Continued non-payment may affect occupancy status." I had inherited 900 acres, 6 rental houses, 3 barns, a pump house, a pond, 2 private gravel roads, and more fence line than any sane man wants to repair in August. What I had not inherited was an HOA. Uncle Warren hated associations so much he would not even join the county farm breakfast club because they elected officers and kept minutes. He used to sit on the porch with a glass of unsweet tea, point across the pasture toward the glossy rooftops of Silver Ridge, and say, "Caleb, this land answers to weather, taxes, and God. No board." I heard his voice in my head while Mason watched me read the receipt. The paper felt soft from being folded too many times. The ink had bled a little where a coffee ring crossed the late fee box. Somewhere in that cheap office print was 11 years of arrogance dressed up as authority. I asked Mason how long he had been paying it. He looked down at his hands. Mason is a diesel mechanic, the kind of man who can rebuild an engine by sound, but right then he looked like a kid, waiting outside the principal's office. "Since I moved in," he said, "they told me all Whitaker tenants had to pay. Said it covered road upkeep, security, shared drainage, all that." I looked out the kitchen window at the dirt yard, the leaning clothesline, the gravel drive full of potholes I had patched myself that morning. There was no shared security, no HOA road crew. No Silver Ridge maintenance truck had ever touched that place unless it got lost. A gust of wind rolled across the pasture and made the old tin roof creak above us. I slid the receipt into my coat pocket beside the iron key ring Uncle Warren had left me, heavy and cold, tagged Northgate, Tenant Road, Pump House. That weight grounded me. Keys mean ownership. Receipts mean someone wants you to forget who owns what. I looked at Mason and kept my voice calm. "Show me every bill they ever sent you." His face changed before he even stood up. Relief, then worry, then something sharper. Hope. He opened a drawer by the stove and pulled out a rubber-banded stack of envelopes thick enough to make my stomach tighten. Cream paper. Red stamps. 11 years of demands. 11 years of tenants paying dues to a board that had no deed, no covenant, and no right to collect a dime. After Mason handed me that stack of envelopes, I drove the tenant road alone with Uncle Warren's iron keys riding heavy in the cup holder. The truck bounced over ruts filled with brown rainwater, and every splash sounded like another question I should have asked years ago. Whitaker Farm did not look like Silver Ridge, and it was never supposed to. Our land rolled wide and rough under a gray Tennessee sky. 900 acres of pasture, tree line, creek bed, hay fields, and old structures that carried more honesty in their rusted hinges than any polished clubhouse ever could. The gravel road ran nearly 2 miles from Northgate to the main house, past the first rental cottage with its faded blue shutters, past the pump house that hummed like an old refrigerator, past the south barn where swallows nested under the rafters every spring. The air smelled like wet clay, diesel, and cedar fence posts. That smell was my childhood. Uncle Warren raised cattle here before cattle stopped paying enough, then leased the small houses to working families because he said land should keep people standing, not just sit pretty for investors. He was stubborn, private, and impossible to rush. He paid his taxes early, kept his leases handwritten but clear, and fixed tenant porches before anyone had to ask twice. When developers started building Silver Ridge estates along the west boundary, they sent him letters with glossy renderings and phrases like premium residential integration. He taped one of those letters above his workbench and wrote no in black marker across the front. That was Uncle Warren. One word, straight as a fence line. When he died, the lawyer called it a simple inheritance. 900 acres, 6 rental houses, 3 barns, the pond, equipment, easements, mineral notes, and a filing cabinet full of records that smelled like pipe tobacco and dust. Simple on paper, heavy in the hands. I was 39, old enough to know grief does not always come as tears. Sometimes it comes as a set of keys and a list of repairs. I had spent the first week checking roofs, clearing culverts, changing locks, and introducing myself to tenants who had known my uncle better than I had in his final years. Mason was the third one I visited. He was supposed to be a routine lease review. Instead, he had placed 11 years of fake authority on the table. I stopped at North Gate and killed the engine. The gate was nothing fancy, just 2 weathered steel posts and a chain thick enough to remind people this was private land. The tag on Warren's key read North Gate in his blocky handwriting. I held it in my palm while the wind moved through the grass beyond the fence. Across the road, Silver Ridge sat on its hill with matching mailboxes, trimmed hedges, stone entrance columns, and little bronze signs that seemed to whisper money. Their lawns looked soft enough to sleep on. Our pasture looked like work. That was the line Eleanor Prescott had spent 11 years trying to blur. She did not need to own the land if she could train people to act like she did. She did not need a deed if she had invoices, late fees, and tenants scared of losing the roofs over their heads. I turned the key in the old padlock, and the chain dropped into my hand with a cold scrape. The sound carried down the empty road like a promise. Before I confronted anyone, I needed to understand exactly what had been stolen, who had paid it, and how far the lie had traveled. By late afternoon, I had driven enough of Whitaker Farm to feel the size of the problem under my tires. 900 acres sounds clean when a lawyer says it in an office, like a number on a tax form. Out there, it had weight. It was the low groan of cattle panels in the wind, the hollow knock of a loose barn door, the smell of damp hay and old engine oil rising from buildings that had survived storms, recessions, and men with better shoes than intentions. The land did not announce itself all at once. It unfolded slowly, pasture first, then a creek crossing where smooth stones flashed under brown water, then the East Hay field rolling out flat and wide, then a stand of oak trees where my uncle used to hang feed buckets when I was a kid. Every gate had a purpose. Every rut had a memory. Every tenant house sat where it sat because somebody had thought about sun, drainage, wind, and how far a working person should have to walk to reach a mailbox in the rain. That was the difference between Whitaker Farm and Silver Ridge. Silver Ridge had been designed to impress people driving past at 25 miles per hour. Whitaker Farm had been built to keep people alive through ordinary hard days. I stopped at the second rental house, a white cottage with peeling trim and a porch swing that squeaked in the breeze. A woman named Dana Willis lived there with her 2 boys. She worked nights at the county hospital and still had the tired, alert eyes of somebody who slept in pieces. When I asked about Silver Ridge dues, her face tightened before she answered. She brought out a shoebox from the hall closet. Inside were receipts, warning letters, and 3 notices about unauthorized outdoor equipment because her sons had left bicycles near the porch. The paper smelled like old closet dust and printer ink. One notice claimed the HOA could recommend lease termination for repeated noncompliance. I felt my jaw lock, but I kept my voice steady. Did my uncle ever tell you to pay these? She shook her head. No, but Silver Ridge said they handled tenant standards for him. They said Mr. Warren was old and did not want to be bothered. That sentence stayed with me as I drove to the next house, and the next, and the next. A retired couple had paid annual access fees because they were afraid the gate code would be changed. A young landscaper had been fined for parking his work trailer beside his own rental shed. Mason had been charged a drainage contribution after Silver Ridge repaved a road his truck had never used. By sunset, the passenger seat of my pickup was stacked with copies, photographs, and handwritten notes. The sky burned orange over the west pasture, and the roofs of Silver Ridge glowed on the hill beyond our fence, perfect and clean and far too close. I stood beside the truck with Uncle Warren's keys in my hand, listening to crickets start up in the grass. The farm felt different now. Not weaker, angrier in a quiet way. For 11 years, somebody had been reaching across that fence with invoices instead of hands, taking money from people who trusted the wrong letterhead. And every receipt I collected made one thing clearer. This was not confusion. This was a system. The next morning, Eleanor Prescott came to the main house before I had even finished my second cup of coffee. I heard her SUV before I saw it, tires whispering over the gravel like the road had been vacuumed for her arrival. Through the kitchen window, I watched a white Lincoln Navigator roll past the cattle guard and stop beside Uncle Warren's old pickup, still parked under the pecan tree with dust on the windshield and a cracked Farm Bureau sticker in the corner. Eleanor stepped out wearing a pale blue blazer, cream slacks, and sunglasses large enough to hide half her face. She carried a leather folder against her chest and walked toward my porch with the careful confidence of someone used to being welcomed, obeyed, or both. The morning smelled like damp grass, black coffee, and the faint mineral bite of the pond behind the house. A crow called from the fence post near the barn, sharp and ugly, like it knew what kind of conversation was coming. I met her on the porch with Uncle Warren's keys in my left hand. They were cold against my palm. She smiled before speaking, but her eyes had already measured the peeling paint, the old screen door, the muddy boots beside the steps, and probably the value of every acre she wished she controlled. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, smooth as a bank teller denying a loan. "I am Eleanor Prescott, president of the Silver Ridge Homeowners Association. First, let me say how sorry we all were to hear about Warren." The way she said Warren bothered me. Too familiar for someone who had spent 11 years billing his tenants behind his back. "Appreciate that," I said. "Then I imagine you understand why this transition needs to be handled responsibly." She opened the folder and pulled out a packet with color tabs. Community Integration Summary. Tenant Compliance Overview. Shared Boundary Maintenance. The words were clean. The purpose was not. She explained that the tenants on Whitaker Farm had benefited from proximity to Silver Ridge for over a decade, that their visual standards affected neighborhood values, that drainage patterns and access perception created what she called a blended community footprint. I let her talk. The porch boards creaked under my boots. The old wind chime beside the door tapped softly in the breeze, glass against brass, patient and small. Eleanor continued, "Your uncle understood the arrangement in practice, even if the original paperwork was informal." There it was. Informal. The word people use when the paper does not exist. I looked at the packet in her hand. "Show me the recorded covenant." Her smile paused, just long enough to become honest. "This is more about community cooperation than technical language. You have been charging my tenants annual dues, late fees, compliance penalties, access fees, and drainage contributions. That sounds technical to me." Her fingers tightened around the folder. "Your tenants use the same regional corridor, benefit from our security presence, and affect our property values. Silver Ridge has simply maintained reasonable standards where your uncle preferred not to be involved." The insult was soft, but I heard it. Warren had not been uninvolved. He had been trusting, old, sick near the end, and she had turned that into an opening. I stepped inside, picked up Mason's first receipt from the kitchen table, and brought it back out. The paper fluttered once in the wind between us. "This says continued non-payment may affect occupancy status. You are not their landlord. You are not my property manager. You have no recorded authority over this land." Eleanor lowered her sunglasses and looked at me like I had become less convenient. "Mr. Whitaker, I would advise you not to disrupt an established system before you understand the consequences." The crow called again from the fence post. I folded the receipt carefully and slid it back into my pocket beside the keys. "I understand systems just fine," I said. "That is why I am going to take this one apart piece by piece." Her smile disappeared completely then, and for the first time since she stepped out of that white SUV, the silence belonged to me. After Eleanor left, the farm did not get quieter. It got louder in all the places paper makes noise. Drawers opening, staple removers biting, scanner glass thumping shut. The feed room behind the south barn became my war room because it was the one place Uncle Warren had always trusted with things that mattered. The room smelled like hay dust, motor oil, mouse-chewed cardboard, and the bitter coffee I kept reheating until it tasted like burnt rope. I dragged in a folding table, wiped pigeon dust off the old wall boards, and started building the story where I could see it. County parcel map on the left, tenant leases in the middle, Silver Ridge invoices on the right, photographs under each tenant name, dates written in black marker, amounts circled in red. Uncle Warren's iron key sat in the center of the table beside Mason's first receipt, heavy enough to keep the papers from curling when the barn fan kicked on. That was the first rule I made for myself. No guessing, no yelling, no giving Eleanor 1 inch of emotional fog to hide behind. Facts only. Dana Willis came by after her. Night shift, still wearing hospital scrubs, her hair tied back, her eyes tired but steady. She brought a folder of receipts and 2 emails printed from the library because her home printer had been broken for a year. One email warned that repeated noncompliance could be reported to property ownership. Another mentioned possible removal recommendation. She tapped that line with one finger and said, "I thought they could make you kick us out." The shame in her voice made my chest tighten. Not because she had done anything wrong. Because someone had made a working mother believe a neighborhood board could reach through my lease and touch her home. Mason came next with canceled checks and bank images. The retired couple from the West Cottage brought carbon copies in a cookie tin. The young landscaper arrived with photographs of his trailer and a $300 fine labeled visual disruption. By dark, the folding table had disappeared under 11 years of fear dressed up as administration. Every tenant told the same story in a different voice. Silver Ridge sent the bill. Silver Ridge mentioned access. Silver Ridge hinted that trouble could affect their housing. Nobody wanted to bother Warren because he was older, then sick, then grieving his own strength. Eleanor had not just collected money. She had collected silence. Around 9 that night, my sister Claire called from Nashville. She had been helping sort the estate accounts and could hear the scanner running in the background. "Caleb, tell me you are not doing that thing where you turn grief into a full-time investigation." I looked at the wall of documents, at the receipt with the coffee ring, at the keys that still carried the faint smell of Warren's leather jacket. "Too late," I said. There was a long pause. Then her voice changed. "Send me everything." By midnight, Claire had found the first clean contradiction. In Warren's tax files, Silver Ridge had sent a boundary acknowledgement letter 9 years earlier confirming that Whitaker Farm was outside all association covenants. Same letterhead, same association. Different president back then, but Eleanor had been treasurer. I stood in the feed room with crickets screaming outside and that letter glowing on my phone screen. The whole system shifted under my feet. They had known. Maybe not every board member. Maybe not every collector. But the organization had been told in writing that our land was not theirs. That meant every invoice after that was not a misunderstanding. It was a choice. The next morning, Claire drove in from Nashville with a banker's box, a laptop, and the kind of expression she used to wear when our uncle tried to fix electrical wiring without shutting off the breaker. She found me in the feed room with my sleeves rolled up, county maps taped to the wall, and 11 years of Silver Ridge paper stacked by tenant name. The barn fan turned slowly above us, pushing the smell of hay dust and old motor oil around the room. Claire set her box on the folding table and looked at the wall. "This is worse than you said." I handed her the boundary acknowledgement letter without a word. She read it once, then again, and her mouth tightened. They knew Whitaker Farm was outside the covenants. 9 years ago, I said, and Eleanor was treasurer. That name sat between us like a match near dry grass. Claire had spent 10 years in estate administration, which meant she could smell bad records the way I could smell a failing pump motor. She started sorting while I called attorney Rachel Monroe, a real estate lawyer in Knoxville who had handled farm easements, boundary disputes, and the kind of rural property messes that make city lawyers sweat through their shirts. Rachel did not sound impressed by drama. She sounded interested in paper. "Do not confront the board again without documentation in order," she said. "Skin everything. Keep originals separate. Build a timeline. And Caleb, follow the money." Follow the money. That became the second wall. Mason's checks. Dana's money order receipts. The retired couple's carbon copies. Bank images from tenants who had paid electronically. Every payment went to Silver Ridge Homeowners Association, but the memo lines shifted over the years. Annual dues. Maintenance access. Shared drainage. Community standards. Tenant compliance. The names changed like a snake changing skin, but the account numbers stayed the same. By noon, Claire had built a spreadsheet. By 3, Rachel had connected us with a forensic accountant named Nora Bell, who asked for the records in a voice so calm it made me nervous for Eleanor. Outside, the day turned hot. Cicadas screamed from the tree line. The tin roof popped in the sun. Inside the feed room, The scanner kept moving, its little bar of light sliding under glass again and again, turning fear into evidence. Around sunset, Rachel called back. I put her on speaker, and even the room seemed to hold still. The payments are not going where a legitimate maintenance fee would go, she said. Some land in the general HOA account, but then several transfers move into categories called community enhancement, board consulting, entrance beautification, and special projects. Claire looked up from the laptop. Special projects for what? Rachel paused. Paper rustled on her end. Clubhouse furniture, private landscaping near Silver Ridge Drive, decorative lighting, and a consultant payment to Prescott Community Strategies. I looked at Claire. She had already typed the name. Her fingers stopped over the keyboard. Caleb, she said quietly. That company is registered to Eleanor's nephew. The feed room suddenly felt smaller. All those small houses. All those tenants choosing between bills. All those late fees wrapped in official language. Their money had not been maintaining Whitaker Farm. It had been polishing the neighborhood that looked down on them from the hill. I picked up Uncle Warren's iron keys from the table and closed my fist around them until the edges pressed into my palm. The cold metal kept me steady. Anger wants to run. Evidence walks. So I took a breath, looked at the wall of receipts, and told Rachel. Then we build it so clean they cannot explain it away. By the time Rachel and Nora finished the first pass through the payment trail, Silver Ridge stopped feeling like a neighbor and started looking like a machine. A quiet machine. A polished machine. The kind that hums behind flower beds and stone entrance columns while ordinary people feed it money they were never supposed to owe. I spent the next 2 days driving from tenant house to tenant house with a clipboard of my own, not the kind Eleanor carried like a weapon, but a plain brown one with lease copies, receipt logs, and affidavit forms Rachel had prepared. The air stayed hot and thick, the kind of Tennessee heat that makes your shirt cling before breakfast. Dust rose behind my truck on the tenant road and hung there like smoke that did not want to leave. Dana signed first at her kitchen table while her boys did homework beside a box fan rattling in the window. She read the statement carefully, lips moving over each line, then wrote her name with a hand that shook only at the end. Mason signed in his garage beside a half-rebuilt transmission, his fingers black with grease, his jaw set so tight I could hear his breath through his nose. The retired couple signed on their porch while wind chimes tinkled above us, and the old man said, I knew Warren would never have allowed this if he had known. That sentence stayed with me because it was the truth and the knife at the same time. Warren had protected this farm for 50 years, but near the end, sickness had made his world smaller. Eleanor had waited for the edges to blur, then stepped across them with invoices and soft language. By Friday morning, Rachel sent Silver Ridge a formal demand letter. It was clean, direct, and heavy with attachments. Recorded boundary acknowledgement, tenant statements, payment summaries, bank tracing, demand for immediate cessation of all billing, written correction to all tenants, preservation of records, and refund accounting. Claire read it twice and said, This is the nicest way I have ever seen someone say you are finished. We sent it by certified mail, email, and hand delivery. Then we waited. Not long. Eleanor's response arrived that afternoon in the form of a black sedan, 2 Silver Ridge board members, and a maintenance truck pulling up to North Gate with a metal sign in the bed. I was standing by the pump house when Mason called. His voice came through tight. Caleb, they are at the gate. I got there in 4 minutes. The truck was parked beside the chain, engine ticking in the heat. A worker held a post. Driver. One board member carried a camera. Eleanor stood in the road wearing a white blouse, 10 slacks, and that same smooth expression, but now there was something bright and brittle behind it. The metal sign leaned against the truck, fresh from a shop, all blue letters on white aluminum. Silver Ridge, HOA jurisdiction. Tenant access subject to community rules. For a second, all I heard was the dry grass whispering against the fence. Then Uncle Warren's keys shifted in my pocket, iron against iron, and the sound brought me back. You are not installing that, I said. Eleanor turned slowly, as if she had been expecting me to arrive angry and wanted witnesses for it. This is boundary clarification, she said. After your recent confusion, the board felt it was necessary. I looked at the sign, then at the worker, then at the camera pointed in my direction. That gate is mine. That road is mine. The tenants are mine. Your board has no jurisdiction here. Her smile came back, thinner than paper. Then I suppose we should let the county decide. She lifted her phone and made the call right there, standing beside my gate, claiming my land in front of her own camera. I did not stop her. I just opened my truck door, took out the black binder Rachel had labeled Northgate evidence, and set it on the hood where the sun could hit every tab. Deputy Aaron Keller arrived 12 minutes later in a county cruiser with dust on the doors and no patience for theater. His tires rolled to a stop beside Northgate, and the whole scene seemed to arrange itself for him. Eleanor stood near the metal sign with 2 board members behind her. The maintenance worker held the post driver low at his side, looking like a man who suddenly wished he had taken a different job that morning. Mason had parked his truck by the pump house, arms folded, grease still dark under his fingernails. I stood at my hood with the black binder open, Uncle Warren's keys in my pocket, and the hot wind moving through the fence wire with a dry metallic hum. Deputy Keller stepped out, adjusted his hat, and looked from the sign to the chain to Eleanor. "Who called this in?" "I did," she said quickly. "This man is interfering with Silver Ridge property management and refusing lawful access to association-controlled tenant roads." She said it smoothly, like she had been practicing while we waited. Keller looked at me. "Mr. Whitaker?" "Yes, sir. You have a different version?" "I have documents." His body camera blinked red. Eleanor saw it. This time, I saw her notice. Her shoulders tightened, but she kept her smile in place. "Deputy," she said, "this is an established administrative arrangement. The tenants have complied for years." I turned one page in the binder. The plastic sleeve made a clean whisper in the heat. "Before I show my paperwork, I want her statement clear on camera." Keller glanced at me, then back at Eleanor. "Ma'am, are you claiming Silver Ridge has authority over this gate, this tenant road, and the rental houses beyond it?" Eleanor lifted her chin. "Yes. Silver Ridge has managed this access and tenant compliance for 11 years. The words hung there in the sunlight. Clean. Complete. Recorded. I opened the first tab. This is the recorded deed transferring Whitaker Farm to me through Warren Whitaker's estate. 900 acres, including Northgate, Tenant Road, the 6 rental houses, Pump House, South Barn, and all private access roads. Keller took the document and read silently. I handed him the next page. This is the county parcel map. Silver Ridge ends at the west boundary fence. Their covenants do not cross this line. Then the next. This is the boundary acknowledgement letter Silver Ridge sent to my uncle 9 years ago, confirming the same thing. For the first time, Eleanor looked at the paper instead of me. Her face did not fall apart. People like her rarely give you that satisfaction. But the color shifted under her makeup, just enough. I pulled the receipt stack from the binder and laid it on my hood. Cream envelopes. Red stamps. Late fees. Threats about occupancy. These are invoices sent to my tenants for dues, penalties, drainage fees, and access fees. These are canceled checks. These are affidavits from tenants stating they were told payment affected their housing. Keller's eyes moved slower now. Not confused. Careful. And the sign. I pointed to the white aluminum board leaning against their truck. They attempted to install that today after receiving a legal demand to stop claiming authority over my land. The maintenance worker stepped back from the sign without being asked. Eleanor spoke fast. "This is a civil disagreement over shared community benefit." "No," I said, keeping my voice level. "A civil disagreement is when 2 people misunderstand a fence line. This is 11 years of billing people under authority your own records said you did not have." Keller closed the binder halfway and looked at Eleanor. "Ma'am, do not install the sign. Do not enter beyond this gate unless you have written permission or a court order. This needs to go through attorneys." The wind pushed dust across the road between us. Eleanor's smile was gone now. Not broken. Removed. She stared at the binder on my hood like it had betrayed her. But paper does not betray anyone. It only remembers what people thought they could hide. 3 days after Deputy Keller told Silver Ridge to stay off my land, Rachel filed the complaint that turned a farm dispute into a county investigation. She did not write it like a speech. She wrote it like a ledger. Date, invoice, tenant, amount, payment method, account destination, false authority statement, supporting document. Page after page, the pattern walked itself into daylight. The county clerk stamped the filing on a rainy Tuesday morning, and the sound of that stamp hitting paper felt louder to me than Eleanor's whole polished performance at Northgate. By Friday, The county auditor requested Silver Ridge's banking records. By the following Monday, the state attorney general's Consumer Protection Division had opened a file. That was when Silver Ridge changed its tone. The same board that had sent red letter notices for 11 years suddenly wanted conversation. Eleanor's first email said there had been confusion regarding legacy maintenance practices. Her second email mentioned mutual misunderstanding. Her third came from an attorney and used the phrase "without admission of wrongdoing" so many times it started to look like wallpaper. Rachel printed each one and pinned them to the feed room wall under a new label. Language after exposure. Claire read that label and laughed for the first time in days. The laugh did not last long. Nora Bell's tracing report arrived that afternoon, and it was uglier than even Rachel expected. $216,000 had been collected from Whitaker tenants over 11 years. Some of it moved through the general operating account. Some of it went to entrance landscaping, clubhouse furniture, decorative lighting, and private security patrols that never crossed our fence line. Then there were the consulting payments. Prescott Community Strategies had received nearly $38,000 in 3 years for community outreach, tenant compliance coordination, and boundary communication. Eleanor's nephew owned the company. His business address was a mailbox inside a shipping store. I stood in the feed room reading those numbers while rain ticked on the tin roof and muddy water dripped from my boots onto the concrete floor. Every dollar had a face now. Dana taking extra shifts. Mason delaying repairs on his truck. The retired couple cutting grocery costs because a fake access fee came due every spring. Silver Ridge had not been stealing from land. It had been draining people. The tenants signed updated affidavits, and this time there was no hesitation. The county scheduled a public review at the old courthouse, a brick building with worn steps and brass doors polished by generations of nervous hands. The hearing room smelled like wet coats, paper files, and burnt coffee from a machine in the hallway. Eleanor sat with her attorney on one side, wearing gray instead of her usual bright colors. I sat with Rachel, Claire, Mason, Dana, and the others. Uncle Warren's iron keys were in my jacket pocket, pressing against my ribs every time I breathed. The auditor spoke first. Her voice was flat, almost gentle, but every sentence landed hard. No recorded covenant. No lawful dues authority. No service agreement. No property management contract. No evidence that Whitaker Farm received the maintenance charged to its tenants. Then Rachel placed the 9-year-old boundary acknowledgement letter on the projector. Same association. Same conclusion. Eleanor had been treasurer when they received it. The room went still in a way I had only heard once before, right after a storm takes the power out and everyone realizes how dark it really is. Eleanor tried to call it administrative continuity. The auditor called it unauthorized collection. Dana looked down at her hands and started crying quietly. Mason reached over and put one grease-stained hand on the back of her chair. Nobody said a word. The documents had finally said enough. The order came down 6 weeks after the courthouse hearing, printed on plain white paper with a county seal at the top and enough weight in the wording to make 11 years of excuses collapse without making a sound. Silver Ridge had to stop all billing connected to Whitaker Farm, issue written corrections to every current and former tenant they could identify, refund unauthorized payments with documented accounting, and submit to outside financial oversight for 3 years. Eleanor Prescott resigned before the ink was dry. Her letter called it a personal decision made for the good of the community. Rachel read that sentence aloud in the feed room and raised one eyebrow. Claire said, "That is the fanciest way I have ever heard someone say the door was closing." The refunds started arriving in late spring. Dana brought hers to the main house because she did not believe it was real until I read the memo line with her. Unauthorized tenant assessment reimbursement. She stood in my kitchen holding that check with both hands while the screen door rattled in a warm breeze and her boys chased each other across the yard outside. Mason used part of his refund to finish the transmission he had been putting off. The retired couple replaced the leaky roof over their back porch. Money does not erase fear, but it gives people back a little room to breathe. That was the part Silver Ridge never understood. They had treated working families like entries in a ledger, but every fake fee had come out of groceries, medicine, tires, school shoes, repairs, and quiet nights of sleep. By summer, the old north gate got a new chain, a new lock, and a new sign. Set between 2 cedar posts, I cut myself. Whitaker Farm private land. No homeowners association authority. Tenant access protected by lease. I kept Uncle Warren's original iron keys in my jacket pocket while I worked, even though the new lock needed a different key. Some things are not tools anymore. They become witnesses. The first time the new sign caught sunset light, the letters glowed soft gold against the pasture behind it. Across the fence, Silver Ridge still had its trimmed hedges, its stone columns, and its smooth lawns, but it looked smaller to me now. Not poorer, not ruined, just smaller. A place built on appearance finally measured by records. I spent that evening driving the Tenant road slowly, windows down, dust rolling behind the truck, cicadas loud in the tree line. Dana waved from her porch. Mason lifted a hand from his garage. The retired couple had their porch light on, warm and steady, not approved by any committee and not needing to be. At the pump house, I stopped and listened to the motor hum, deep and reliable, pulling water the way it always had. For the first time since the funeral, the farm felt like Warren had left it in my care instead of my custody. I parked at Northgate just as the sun dropped behind the Silver Ridge rooftops. The air smelled like cut hay, warm gravel, and rain still waiting somewhere beyond the hills. I took Mason's first wrinkled receipt from my folder and looked at the coffee ring across the late fee box. That little piece of paper had opened a door nobody at Silver Ridge thought anyone would check. They believed authority lived in letterhead, polished meetings, and words like integration and community benefit. My uncle knew better. Authority is a deed. It is a lease. It is a boundary line. It is a key that fits the lock because the land remembers who is supposed to hold it. I folded the receipt, slid it beside the old iron keys, and closed my hand around both. Justice does not need a spotlight. Sometimes it just needs a receipt, a witness, and one stubborn man willing to read the fine print.